The lock whispered its secrets to her bleeding fingertips, just like Grandpa said it would. But this time, Esperanza Delgado wasn't practicing in his garage. She was trapped in a tomb of chlorine-stained tiles and rust, with 23 minutes until her entire future disappeared. But before I tell you how a bobby pin and a broken heart brought down the most powerful family in Connecticut, I need to share something. These stories about kids like Esperanza, who nobody believes in until they have no choice but to believe in themselves, they find their way to me through whispers and old yearbooks, and sometimes through messages that start with, "You won't believe what happened at my school." If this story moves you, if it reminds you of someone who fought battles nobody saw, please hit that like button. Leave a comment about your own Preston Academy, whatever it looked like. And if you want to help me keep finding and sharing these stories that need to be told, there's a thanks button right below this video. Every single contribution helps me dig deeper, travel farther, and bring you stories that might otherwise stay buried in shame and silence. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Now let me tell you about Esperanza. I should probably start at the beginning, or maybe the middle. Time gets funny when you're 17 and watching your carefully built American dream crumble because you walked down the wrong hallway at the wrong moment. My name is Esperanza Ezzi, to anyone who couldn't roll the R properly, which was basically everyone at Preston Academy. And on October 15th, 2024, I learned that in Greenwich, Connecticut. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time could cost you everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you a picture of Preston Academy first. Because you need to understand this place, to understand why a janitor's closet became a battlefield and a cheerleading tryout became a revolution. Preston Academy squatted on 40 acres of manicured perfection, all red brick and white columns, like someone had taken Thomas Jefferson's fever dream and pumped it full of hedge fund money. The kind of place where the parking lot had more BMWs than a German auto show, where kids complained about spending spring break in Gstaad instead of Aspen, where being different wasn't just noticed, it was catalogued, filed, and used against you when necessary. I'd been there exactly 71 days. 71 days of eating lunch alone in the library, pretending to read while the laughter from the cafeteria filtered through the walls like smoke. 71 days of swimming upstream through hallways full of people who looked through me like I was made of glass. Not mean. Exactly. Just absent, like I was a ghost haunting my own life. Mom worked nights at Preston General, came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. "Just keep your head down, mija," she'd say, smoothing my hair back with hands that had saved lives and changed bedpans with equal grace. "Get good grades, get into a good college, show them who we are." Who we were. Former El Paso residents with sun-baked memories and calloused hands, a nurse and her daughter, living in a 2-bedroom apartment while our new classmates went home to estates with names. The Delgados of Unit 12B, where the radiator clanged like a ghost in chains and the walls were thin enough to hear Mrs. Chen's Korean dramas through the plaster. That Tuesday started like any other. October in Connecticut was showing off, painting the trees in shades of fire and gold that made me homesick for desert sunsets. I'd stayed late in the library, wrestling with calculus problems that seemed designed to break spirits rather than teach mathematics. By the time I packed up, the hallways had that hollow quality they get after hours, when the lockers stop slamming and the building remembers it's just brick and mortar, not a kingdom. The main exit was locked. They did that after 6 p.m. Something about insurance and liability. I could have called security. Waited for Larry to shuffle over with his massive keyring and his stories about Nam. But Mom's shift started at 7, and I'd promised to have dinner ready, so I took the shortcut through the old athletic complex, the one they kept saying they'd renovate but never did because the new facility was shinier, better for recruiting. The pool area had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since they built the Olympic-sized natatorium on the east side of campus. Chlorine ghosts still haunted the air, mixing with mildew and neglect. I pushed through the double doors, their hinges screaming like warnings I didn't hear. That's when I saw them. Coach Bradley stood in the shallow end of the empty pool. His Preston Academy windbreakers zipped up, despite the warmth of the heating system they'd never bothered to shut off. Across from him, balanced on the diving board like he was posing for a yearbook photo, was Nathaniel Whitmore III. Everyone knew Nate. You couldn't not know him. 6 feet, 2 inches of carefully cultivated perfection. From his investment banker haircut to his Italian leather shoes that cost more than our rent. Student body president, lacrosse captain, son of Mayor Whitmore and grandson of Judge Whitmore. The kind of boy who was born on third base and convinced everyone he'd hit a triple, in the hollow echo of that abandoned space. Their voices carried like thunder. "Morrison's kid needs to make varsity," Bradley was saying. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, thick as a sandwich. "His father's very grateful for your cooperation." Nate took the envelope without looking inside, sliding it into his messenger bag with practiced ease. "Done. Parker's out anyway, failed his drug test last week. We'll say Morrison earned the spot. He can barely hold a stick. Then you'll teach him." Nate's voice had that quality I'd learned to fear silk wrapped around steel. "That's what gratitude buys, Coach. Excellence, one way or another." I must have made a sound. Maybe my backpack scraped the door. Or maybe my heart was beating loud enough to echo off the tiles. Both their heads snapped toward me like predators scenting prey. For a moment, nobody moved. We were a tableau of mistakes, them for being there, me for seeing it, all of us for what would happen next. Nate smiled. It was the kind of smile that made you understand why humans were apex predators before they invented civilization. "Well," he said, sliding off the diving board with liquid grace, "look what we have here." I ran, not fast enough. He caught me by the old trainer's room, his hand closing on my backpack hard enough to jerk me off my feet. I went down hard, knees cracking against the tile, calculus homework exploding across the floor like snow. "Esperanza Delgado," he said, reading my name off a scattered paper. His pronunciation was perfect. Of course it was. Boys like Nate collected accomplishments like baseball cards. "The new girl, from El Paso." He said it like it was a disease. I tried to stand. He stepped on my homework, grinding equations under his heel. "You know what I love about this school?" he asked conversationally. "The silence. People here understand discretion. They know when to see, when to hear, and most importantly, when to forget." "I didn't see anything," I said. "Of course you didn't." He crouched it down, still smiling that terrible smile. This close. I could see why half the girls at Preston wrote his name in their notebooks. He was magazine beautiful, symmetrical as a mathematical proof. Because if you had seen something, well, that would be unfortunate, Ed, for everyone. Coach Bradley hadn't moved from the empty pool. He stood there like a statue, waiting for Nate to handle it, to handle me. That's when I understood the real hierarchy at Preston Academy. It wasn't about money, though money helped. It wasn't about legacy. Though legacy opened doors, it was about power, and Nathaniel Whitmore III had been collecting it since birth. "I have to go," I whispered. Your mom works at Preston General, night shift. ICU, Rosa Delgado, employee number 4729. He wasn't looking at notes. He just knew. Been there 6 months. Good reviews. It would be a shame if the hospital board heard she'd been stealing supplies. Selling them. Maybe. Times are tough for single mothers. The world tilted. I tasted bile and fear and something else, rage. Maybe. Though I wouldn't recognize it until later. She would never. Of course not. But accusations have a way of sticking, don't they? Investigations take time, suspended without pay while they sort it out. And nursing licenses. Well, he stood, brushing imaginary dust off his khakis. They're so fragile, like everything in this world. He left me there, kneeling in my scattered homework. Coach Bradley walked past without looking at me, whistling something tuneless. I stayed on that floor for 10 minutes. 15, trying to remember how to breathe. When I finally made it home. Mom was already gone. I found her note on the kitchen table. "Enchiladas in the fridge. Mija. Study hard. Love you." I threw up in the kitchen sink, then cleaned it until it shone. That night, I lay in bed listening to Mrs. Chen's dramas through the wall and tried to make sense of what had happened. In El Paso, threats were direct, violent, sometimes, but honest. A boy might threaten to fight you, but he wouldn't threaten your mother's job. He wouldn't smile while destroying your life from the foundations up. I thought about calling someone, but who? The principal who had Whitmore Library named after his family. The police chief who golfed with the mayor every Sunday. The school counselor who wore a Preston Academy class ring from the same year as Nate's father. So I did what generations of Delgados had done when faced with impossible odds. I got up the next morning and pretended everything was fine. But everything was not fine. It started small. My locker combination changed overnight, leaving me scrambling for security while first period ticked away. Emails from teachers about missing assignments I'd never received. My name mysteriously dropping off the honors chemistry lab list. "Technical difficulties," the registrar said, not meeting my eyes. These things happen, and they happened to me 5 times that week. Then came the whispers. Somehow, word had spread that I was difficult, that I'd been caught somewhere I shouldn't be. The details were vague enough to let imagination fill in the worst. Girls who'd ignored me before now actively avoided me. Boys looked at me like I was contagious. Only one person talked to me that week, Marcus Chen, who sat behind me in AP Computer Science and whose mother's Korean dramas I knew by heart. "You pissed off Whitmore," he said on Friday. Sliding into the seat next to mine at lunch, he was skinny in that way tech kids are. All angles and nervous energy. Nobody survives that. "I'm still here," I said. "No," he said quietly. "You're not. You just don't know it yet." He told me about Imani Washington then, how she'd been the first black cheerleading captain in Preston Academy's history, how she'd challenged Nate for student body president, running on a platform of actual change instead of cocktail party promises, how there'd been an accident at the old pool facility. Faulty wheelchair ramp, they said. Imani's spinal cord said different. "She's still around," Marcus said. "Comes to games sometimes. Helps coach the squad from her chair. But she doesn't talk about what happened. Nobody does." "That's insane," I said. "People can't they?" He pulled up something on his phone. Whitmore Industries donated $10 million to the new athletic complex. Whitmore Foundation funds 30% of the school's scholarship program. Whitmore, Whitmore, Whitmore. You think anyone's going to choose you over that? He was right, but he was also wrong, because he'd chosen to sit with me. That had to count for something. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because I've been watching Nate Whitmore hurt people for 3 years. Because I'm tired of being scared. Because," he paused, adjusting his glasses, "because my mom likes you. Says you always turn down your music when her shows are on." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in 71 days, that weekend. I made a decision. If I was going down, I'd go down swinging. Mom had always wanted me to try cheerleading, said it would help me make friends. Get involved. The tryouts were coming up in 2 weeks. It was insane to think I could make the squad with no experience, no connections, no chance. But Imani Washington would be there. And maybe, just maybe, she'd help someone else who'd crossed Nathaniel Whitmore and lived to tell about it. I spent every free moment in our apartment's cramped living room, teaching myself routines from YouTube videos with the sound turned low. My body remembered things from childhood, the folk dancing classes Mom had scrapped to afford, the gymnastics lessons that ended when Dad left. I wasn't great, but I was determined. Marcus helped, in his way. He hacked the school's camera system. It's not really hacking if they never changed the default password. And we studied the cheerleading practice footage like game tape. He showed me Imani's old routines, the ones that had made her legendary before the accident. She was going to get a full ride to Duke, he said, watching her execute a perfect barrel roll on his laptop screen. Early admission, the works. Now she's taking online classes at community college. Because she stood up to Nate. Because she was better than him. That's the unforgivable sin at Preston Academy. Being better than the people who own everything. The days blurred together. School, where I navigated hallways like a ghost. Home, where I practiced until my muscles screamed. Late nights with Marcus. Planning for tryouts like generals planning a campaign. Mom noticed the bruises from my amateur tumbling. "What happened?" "Mija, just clumsy." I lied. "You know me." She touched my face gently. "I know you're my brave girl, but you don't have to be brave alone." If only that were true. The Wednesday before tryouts. I found my textbooks in the toilet. The Thursday before. Someone keyed "Go home" into my locker. But Friday was the worst. I'd stayed late again, practicing in the empty dance studio when I went to change. My regular clothes were gone. In their place was a cheerleading uniform used, donated by some graduated senior for girls who couldn't afford new ones. It should have been a sign of hope. Instead, it was shredded, cut with surgical precision into ribbons, arranged on the bench like a corpse. Pinned to the remains was a note in Nate's perfect handwriting. "Some people just don't belong." I sat on that bench for an hour, holding the destroyed uniform like a funeral shroud. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd hoped for, reduced to designer confetti. I thought about calling Mom, but she was already at work. I thought about crying, but tears felt too small for this kind of cruelty. Instead, I gathered every piece of that mutilated uniform, stuffed them in my backpack, like evidence of a crime. Walked home through October darkness that smelled like dying leaves and rich people's fireplaces. That night, I sat at our kitchen table with scissors and thread, trying to piece together something wearable from the wreckage. Mom's sewing machine, a singer older than me, hummed while Mrs. Chen's dramas provided soundtrack through the walls. I worked until my fingers bled, until the sun painted the sky the color of a bruise. By morning, I had something. Not a uniform. Exactly. More like a promise stitched together with stubborn thread and spite. It would have to be enough. Saturday morning came too fast and too slow. I got to school at 6:30. When the parking lot was empty, except for maintenance trucks and the ghosts of Friday night's parties, the gym doors were locked. But I'd expected that. What I hadn't expected was the note taped to them. Pool facility for overflow changing. Side entrance open. The old pool. Of course, I should have known it was a trap. Should have turned around, gone home, admitted defeat. But Delgados don't run from fights. We just find different ways to win them. The side entrance was open, just like the note promised. The changing room was exactly as abandoned as I remembered: rusted lockers, broken benches, that persistent smell of chlorine and decay. I set my bag down carefully, the pieced-together uniform rustling inside like broken wings. That's when I heard the lock click, not the main door that was still open, morning light streaming through the reinforced glass. The sound came from behind me, from the equipment room where they used to store kickboards and lane lines. I turned, and there he was, Nathaniel Whitmore III, dressed in his perfect Saturday casual wear, holding a padlock the size of my fist. "Good morning, Esperanza," he said pleasantly. "Lovely day for a swim, don't you think?" Behind him, 3 more figures emerged from the shadows, boys from the lacrosse team, each one 6 feet of privilege and cruelty. They spread out, blocking every exit except the one Nate had just locked. "Tryouts don't start for 90 minutes, Nate continued, twirling the padlock key on his finger. "But don't worry. We'll make sure you don't miss them." One of his friends, Parker, I think, the one whose spot would go to Morrison's son, laughed. "Gonna be hard to make the squad from in here, though." That's when I understood. They weren't going to hurt me. Not physically. That would leave marks, evidence, liability. They were just going to lock me in this chlorine tomb until tryouts were over, until my chance was gone, until I learned my place. "You can't do this," I said, hating how small my voice sounded in that echo chamber of tile and memory. "Can't I?" Nate pocketed the key. "Who's going to stop me?" "You." They left me there, their laughter bouncing off the walls long after the door slammed shut. I heard the heavy click of the padlock, the scrape of something being wedged under the door handle, through the high windows, unreachable even if I could break them. Morning light poured in like mockery. I was trapped. 90 minutes from now, Imani Washington would be at tryouts, looking for girls with heart and fury and the courage to fly. 89 minutes from now, the registration table would close. 88 minutes from now, my last chance at belonging somewhere, anywhere, in this crystalline prison of a school would evaporate like chlorine in sunlight. I tried everything, screaming until my throat went raw, but the pool facility was soundproofed, designed to contain the chaos of swim meets, throwing my body against the door until my shoulder bloomed purple with bruises, searching for another exit, any exit, in a room designed to have exactly one. Time became elastic. Stretching and snapping back, I watched dust motes dance in the light and thought about giving up, about letting Nathaniel Whitmore III win, about becoming another ghost story, another warning whispered in hallways about what happens when you forget your place. But then I heard it, felt it, really. in my bones and blood, and the spaces between heartbeats. My grandfather's voice, speaking Spanish in my memory. Mija, every lock tells a story. You just have to listen. And in that moment, standing in a tomb of tile and chlorine with 73 minutes until my future disappeared, I finally understood what he meant. The lock wasn't on the inside of the door, Nate was too smart for that. But the equipment room had other locks. Old ones. Forgotten ones. The kind my grandfather used to collect in coffee cans in his garage. Each one, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every lock has a weakness. Mija, he'd told me, his hands guiding mine over the mechanisms. The expensive ones, they try to hide it, but the cheap ones, they're honest about being broken. The supply closet in the corner had a padlock from the 1980s. All rust and false confidence. I pulled 2 bobby pins from my hair, the same ones I'd planned to use to keep my ponytail perfect during tryouts. Bent one into a tension wrench, the other into a rake. My hands shook. Sweat made the pins slippery. 58 minutes until registration closed. Listen to the pins, Grandpa whispered in my memory. Feel them talk to you. Click, click. Nothing. 55 minutes. I forced myself to breathe. To remember. This wasn't about strength or speed. It was about patience, about feeling each pin find its place. Like dancers finding their marks. Click, click, give. The padlock fell open like a confession. Inside the supply closet, cleaning supplies. Old equipment. And thank God a ventilation grate. Big enough for a 17-year-old girl who'd grown up climbing fence posts in El Paso. Big enough for someone desperate enough to try. The screws were stripped, painted over a dozen times. I used the bobby pins again, working them into the grooves, turning with fingers already bloody from the lock. 1 screw. 2. The grate came free with a shriek that sounded like victory. The vent was a nightmare of dust and darkness and things I didn't want to identify, but it led up, and up was out. I climbed, using skills my Border Patrol uncle had taught me about confined spaces. Sometimes the only way out is through. Sabrina, remember that. 41 minutes. The vent opened onto the roof. I emerged like something from a horror movie covered in dust. Cobwebs in my hair. The knees of my jeans torn from crawling. The October morning hit me like a slap. Cold and clean and free. I ran. Not to the gym. That's what they'd expect me showing up frantic. Filthy. Defeated. No. I ran to the one place at Preston Academy that actually felt safe, the old theater department's costume room. Marcus was waiting. Jesus, Ezzy, what? No time, help me. He'd brought my backpack from the dance studio. Bless his hacker heart. I pulled out the reconstructed uniform, my patchwork promise of fabric and fury. But looking at it now, clean and wholish against my disaster of a body, I almost laughed, or cried, maybe both. I can't show up like this, I said. No, Marcus agreed. You can't. He was already moving, pulling things from the costume racks. Imani did a routine freshman year, Aztec warrior princess, for the multicultural showcase. The costume's still here. That's not a cheerleading uniform. No, it's better. 23 minutes. We worked like a pit crew at NASCAR. Marcus found the pieces, a sports bra covered in golden feathers, a skirt that was half cheerleading, half ceremonial armor. I used the shredded uniform as accents, weaving the Preston Academy colors through the indigenous design like a conversation between who I was and where I was. Your hair, Marcus said. Leave it. Wild, dusty, free. 15 minutes. The gym was packed. Parents with cameras. Students claiming seats. The current cheerleading squad warming up in perfect synchronization. At the registration table, Imani Washington sat in her custom wheelchair, checking names off a list. I walked in with 7 minutes to spare. The room didn't exactly go silent. This wasn't a movie. But there was a ripple effect. Heads turning, phones coming out. Whispers building like a wave. Name, Imani asked, her voice professionally neutral. But her eyes were scanning me like she was reading a book written in a language she'd almost forgotten. Esperanza Delgado. She found me on the list, made a check mark. Then, so quietly only I could hear, changing rooms that way. Unless you're ready, now. I thought about the speech I'd prepared, about explaining the uniform, the statement, the meaning. Instead, I just said, I'm ready. She smiled. It was small, private, dangerous. Good. The tryouts were structured simple group warm-up, individual skills demonstration, choreographed routine, freestyle. I made it through warm-ups on pure adrenaline, my body remembering YouTube tutorials and late-night practice. During skills, I stuck to basics: cartwheel, round off, back handspring. Nothing fancy, nothing that would reveal I'd learned most of this in the last 2 weeks. Then came the choreographed routine, the one everyone had been practicing for months, the one I'd memorized from Marcus's stolen footage. The music started some pop remix that probably cost more to license than our apartment's yearly rent. The other girls moved in perfect unison, all straight lines and sharp angles. I moved with them, but different. Where they punched, I flowed. Where they posed, I spun. I wasn't doing their routine, I was doing mine, hidden inside theirs like a secret. What is she doing? Someone whispered. Getting cut. Someone else answered, but Imani wasn't looking at them. She was watching me like I was writing her a letter in movement, like I was telling her a story she'd been waiting to hear. Then came freestyle. This was where girls usually did their biggest tricks. Back tucks, aerials, the kind of things that looked good on college applications. I had 90 seconds to prove I belonged here. I didn't do a single traditional cheerleading move. Instead, I danced. I danced the story of a girl who'd crossed a border made of money instead of mountains, who'd been locked in a chlorine tomb and clawed her way free, who'd pieced together belonging from scraps and spite and stubborn hope. It was part cheerleading, part Aztec warrior dance, part something I invented in that moment. My grandmother's folklorico footwork, my uncle's knife-fighting stances turned into leaps. Every rejection, every whispered threat, every "your kind doesn't belong here" transformed into motion. The music stopped. I stood there, chest heaving, sweat mixing with leftover dust from the vents. The gym was silent except for my breathing and the hum of industrial lights. Then Imani Washington began to clap. Slow, deliberate. The sound echoed off the walls like gunshots. One person joined her, then another. Then the dam broke, and half the gym was applauding, while the other half sat frozen, unsure what they'd just witnessed. But the real show was happening behind me. See, Marcus Chen was brilliant. But more importantly, he was patient. He'd positioned himself perfectly in the bleachers, phone out like every other spectator, recording like everyone else, except his angle caught more than my performance. It caught Nathaniel Whitmore III in the back corner of the gym, near the emergency exit. It caught him pulling out an envelope, thick as a sandwich. It caught him handing it to 3 members of the judging panel, all current cheerleaders who just happened to be dating his lacrosse teammates. It caught him noticing Marcus, caught the moment his perfect face cracked like an egg, showing the rot inside, caught him lunging for the phone, caught him missing. Because Marcus Chen had been bullied for 3 years, he'd learned to be fast. "He's live streaming," someone shouted. "Check Instagram." Phones came out like weapons. The gym erupted in gasps and screenshots, and the kind of chaos that happens when carefully maintained illusions shatter in real time. "Turn it off," Nate's voice. "Not silk anymore. Just steel. Just desperation. But the internet is forever." And Marcus had tagged everyone. The school, the local news, the State Athletic Association, even because he was thorough the FBI's public corruption unit. Principal Morrison tried to restore order. "Everyone calm down. Please return to—" "Is that your son?" Imani's voice cut through the noise like a blade. She was pointing at the screen, where the live stream replay showed Morrison's kid, the one who could barely hold a lacrosse stick, counting bills. The one who made varsity despite failing tryouts. The principal's face did something complicated. "Shut it down!" Mayor Whitmore's voice boomed from the VIP section. He was standing, all 6 feet 4 inches of political power and parental rage. "This is slander. This is evidence," said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Standing there like she'd been summoned by the chaos was Detective Patricia Santos. Preston PD, off duty. Technically, her kid was trying out, but her badge was already out, and her phone was recording everything. "Nobody moves," she said pleasantly. "I think we need to have some conversations." What happened next was both anticlimactic and beautiful. No dramatic arrests, no screaming matches, just the slow, inexorable collapse of a power structure that had seemed eternal. Nate was escorted out by his father, both of them wearing identical masks of fury. The tryouts were postponed indefinitely. Parents whispered and pointed and slowly, reluctantly, began to leave, but not everyone. Imani rolled over to where I stood, still in my patchwork warrior costume, still breathing hard from dancing my truth. "That was cheerleading," she said simply. "That was survival," I corrected. "Same thing at Preston Academy." She studied me for a long moment. "You know they'll come after you harder now. The Whitmores don't lose gracefully. They already locked me in a closet. What else can they do?" She laughed, but it was sad. "Oh, honey, you have no idea." But she was wrong. Because the video, Marcus's perfect, damning video, wasn't just spreading through Preston Academy, it was everywhere. Mayor's son bribes way through school, made for irresistible headlines. By that night, news vans were camped outside the Whitmore estate. By Monday, the FBI had opened an investigation. By Wednesday, Mayor Whitmore had resigned to focus on clearing his family's name. By Friday, I was eating lunch in the cafeteria for the first time, surrounded by kids who suddenly wanted to hear my story. I didn't trust them, I wasn't stupid. But I wasn't alone anymore either. The cheerleading squad was reformed. Imani was named interim coach, while the administration reviewed policies. She instituted new tryouts, real ones, where money couldn't buy you a spot and connections couldn't save you if you couldn't stick a landing. I made the team. So did 5 other girls who'd been told they didn't belong for various reasons: too poor, too brown, too different. We weren't the best squad Preston Academy had ever seen, but we were the first honest one. Nate finished his senior year at a private school in Switzerland. His father's legal troubles were just beginning, turns out. Bribing coaches was the least of the family's corruption. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with power in our corner of Connecticut, became a cautionary tale about what happens when you believe your own mythology. Marcus got early admission to MIT. His essay about digital activism and social justice probably didn't mention the cheerleading tryouts live stream. But we all knew what really got him in. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well while your enemy's worlds burn down. And me, I kept the warrior princess uniform, hung it in my closet between my regular clothes and my new official cheerleading outfit. Some days I'd look at it and remember the girl who'd crawled through vents, covered in dust and desperation. Other days I'd see the dancer who'd turned trauma into art, who'd refused to let them lock away her light. Mom cried when she saw the video. Then she grounded me for a week for putting yourself in danger, mija. Then she took me out for ice cream and said, "Your grandfather would be so proud. You listened to the locks." All of them, I agreed. Even the ones on people's hearts. Preston Academy changed after that. Not overnight, not completely, but in small ways that mattered. Scholarship kids stopped eating alone. The old pool facility was finally demolished. Too many ghosts, too many secrets. The new principal, recruited from a public school in Brooklyn, had a sign on her door, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." But the biggest change was invisible. It was in the way kids like me walked the hallways heads up, backs straight, unafraid. It was in the knowledge that power structures weren't permanent. That sometimes, all it took was one person willing to dance in the ruins of their oppression. One person, and a boy with a phone and 3 years of rage. One person, and a woman in a wheelchair who'd been waiting for someone brave enough to finish her fight. One person, and the ghost of a grandfather who taught her that every lock has a story. You just have to be willing to listen, and, sometimes, to pick it. The last time I saw Nathaniel Whitmore III was at graduation. He was back from Switzerland for the ceremony, sitting with his family in their usual VIP section. Diminished, but not destroyed cockroaches never really die. They just scatter when you turn on the lights. Our eyes met across the auditorium. For a second, I saw it all again, the empty pool, the envelope, the smile that had promised to ruin me. Then, I did something that probably hurt him more than any investigation or headline or Swiss exile ever could. I looked away first, not because I was scared, not because he'd won, but because he simply didn't matter anymore. He was just another boy who'd confused inherited power with earned respect, who'd built a kingdom on fear and watched it fall to a girl with bobby pins and bruised knees and a story to tell. I had bigger things to focus on, like the full scholarship to UT Austin, like the summer internship with the ACLU, like the text from Imani that morning. Saw a girl getting bullied at the mall yesterday, gave her your number, hope that's okay. It was more than okay. It was perfect. Because that's what survival looks like at places like Preston Academy. Not just making it through, not just enduring, but reaching back to pull others up, building ladders from the same materials they use to build our cages. And sometimes, when the light hits just right and the world feels possible, dancing like your ancestors are watching, dancing like you're finally, truly free. Years later. When people ask me about that day at Preston Academy, I tell them the truth. I didn't plan to start a revolution. I just wanted to make the cheerleading squad. But here's what I learned in that chlorine-scented tomb, picking locks with bloody fingers while my future ticked away. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance create the biggest waves. Sometimes a brown girl in a borrowed warrior costume can bring down dynasties just by refusing to disappear. My grandfather was right about locks. They all have stories. But the most important ones aren't made of metal. They're made of fear, silence, and the word no. And every single one of them can be picked, if you're willing to bleed for it.